O merciful Sultan Rayon, ruler of the sunlit city, thou didst yearn to behold every corner of our known world. Yet many lifetimes would not suffice for thee to explore every land of Ída, for the realm we inhabit is vast and teeming with tales. And of these I, Merula, chronicler of your majesty, shall recount unto thee. The world was not always as it is known unto us today. To understand the nature of our land, we must return in time to the days when the world itself was yet unknown. None now know whence the first of men did come, nor what their destined purpose was, yet it is said that they emerged from the sea. In the great sea there once lay an island of immense size, rich in all that the mind could fathom. By legend, it was raised from the ocean's depths by the gods, a gift unto mankind, a paradise upon the earth. The island was so vast that one might easily mistake it for the central continent. Yet, it was unlike any such land. The trees, the shrubs, and the diverse flora that bore blossoms twice each year grew tall and vibrant. In the wilds, whether in the forests, plains, skies, or seas, roamed untamed creatures and beings unknown to our eyes today. There were found rare red ores, stones of blue and black, and other treasures of the earth. Yet it was not gold nor jewels, by which men now judge the measure of material wealth, that marked this land's abundance, but rather a universal peace, love for all living things, and the plenitude of all that was necessary for a life of calm shared by all. The entire island, as it seemed, gently sloped from the northern mountains across the central plains to the southern shores. To the west stretched a long and lofty mountain range, which shielded the fertile plains from the fierce storms and icy winds that blew from the ocean. Thus the climate remained mild throughout the year, even in winter. And upon this blessed land, the first of men did settle. At first they wandered, like wild beasts among the towering forests and endless grassy plains, until one day their god, Oceanus, appeared unto them. According to the legend, he led them to a place by the southern sea, where he halted and struck his golden trident, and at the very spot where it struck, there sprang forth a golden gleaming spring. Around this place the people raised their first temple consecrated to their god. And as they built their first dwellings around the temple, a circular village arose. Just as bees sense the flowers and build their hives, so did the human race gather at this place and toil with great diligence. No longer needing to roam, they exchanged their leather tents for wood and wood for stone. Their nomadic life and foraging gave way to a settled existence, and they began to cultivate the land. They dug wells and circular canals that they might irrigate their fields and tend their gardens. As it has been told, the island bore fruit twice a year, and thus food, whether from fruit trees, shrubs, or the grains sown by the hand of man, was never in short supply. They also fished the surrounding seas and gathered the many sea fruits which they cherished greatly. For men love beauty, and so they adorned their stone dwellings with blue dyes and various decorations. Here they founded families and multiplied, and from the village in an instant a city was born. But it was not long before the once wild men began to feel cramped. Once more they longed to visit the deep and silent forests, the lush meadows covered with verdant grass. They yearned to see the mountains that had shielded them so well in the days of darkness. What began as a return to nature soon turned to an exodus. Some left the city, never to return, for they began to build their homes in newly discovered places. Though peace reigned, chaos soon crept in, and it became clear that order must be established, as befitting a true civilization. For this purpose, they chose 10 of the foremost men among themselves. These men then gathered the people, and together they decided to colonize the rest of the island. 9 of the 10 groups scattered to the far corners of the land, while the 10th remained in the city to preserve it as a beacon of light for all who might find themselves in distress or danger. The leader who remained in the city was called Atlan. This Atlan lived an unusually long life, and under his just rule, the city prospered and grew strong. Rightfully, he was called the first king among men. Atlan had a daughter, Atlanta, a joyous maiden whom all loved as their own. Yet joy turned to sorrow when the girl suddenly fell ill. No remedy, no herb could alleviate her condition. It was as though by divine will, or perhaps by cruel fate, which sought to balance the long life of her father, she soon passed away. Grief-stricken and aged by the sorrow, her father, too, followed in death. And having given all he could to his people, with nothing left for him to live for, he left the city and never returned. The people bore this loss heavily and could not bid farewell to either of them. They were at a loss as to how to honor their memory, and since no mound can withstand the ravages of time, yet names and pure souls remain eternal, they collectively decided to name the city after them, for Father Atlan and his daughter were to them as family. Thus was born Atlantis, the city of Atlan, where the daughter was laid to rest, and from that day forward they called themselves the Atlanteans. The scattered branches of the Atlanteans remained in contact with the mother city. The people exchanged all that was needed and shared what their lands had to offer. In the northern mountains, a rare ore was found, orichalcum, the mountain's red gold, for this metal was fiery red and radiant. The Atlanteans mined this ore and forged from it all manner of useful tools. With this came a great technological renaissance in their civilization. They even learned to build graceful ships, which they reinforced with orichalcum nails. There was naught they could not accomplish, and soon they grew proud. Oceanus Sea, the ocean, they named the Atlantic Sea. They returned to the hunt, not out of necessity, but for sport. They took on the role of masters over land and sea. Their arrogance was first felt by the peaceful beasts of the land. Upon the plains they hunted innocent deer. They tamed wild horses, beautiful and strong creatures with free souls. They brought down birds from the heavens. They held hunts for dolphins in the seas. When even this was not enough, they turned their fury upon one another. The people of Atlantis, overflowing with excess and no longer valuing anything, began to look upon those who lived in the surrounding villages and small towns as inferior. Soon they felt the need to protect their wealth, as though it might be stolen from them. Therefore, they surrounded all of Atlantis with circular walls, upon which, out of whim, they laid sheets of orichalcum, and the city then gleamed like the summer sun, but within it was hollow and dim. As the Atlanteans grew ever prouder, they became more disconnected from the simplicity and harmony that once defined their ancestors. The city, now a gleaming fortress, stood in stark contrast to the wild beauty of the land they had once revered. Their hearts, once full of compassion and understanding, grew cold with the passage of time, consumed by a hunger for more wealth, more power, more control. The people of Atlantis, once united under the banner of wisdom and peace, now divided into factions, each one seeking dominance over the others. Their rulers, once wise and just, became tyrants who demanded more and more from their people. The city, though shining in its grandeur, was crumbling from within as the bonds of unity and mutual respect were slowly eroded by greed and corruption. And so it was that the great city of Atlantis, the jewel of the ocean, began to falter. The once prosperous land, blessed with bounty and peace, now withered under the weight of its own excess. The people, blinded by their own arrogance, could not see the inevitable disaster that loomed over them. It was then, when the arrogance of the Atlanteans reached its peak, that the gods, angered by their pride and their disregard for the natural order, decreed that Atlantis should fall. A great cataclysm, unseen by mortal eyes, was set in motion. The earth trembled, the seas rose, and the once mighty city of Atlantis was swallowed by the depths of the ocean. In the blink of an eye, the proud civilization that had once ruled the seas was no more. The city, once a beacon of light and hope, was lost to the waves, leaving only echoes of its former glory behind. And thus, the story of Atlantis became a legend, a warning to all who would follow in the footsteps of those who let their pride blind them to the true meaning of life. And so, the world carried on, but the memory of Atlantis lingered in the hearts of those who still remembered. A reminder that all things, no matter how great, must one day fade away, and that the greatest treasures are not those of gold and silver, but the bonds of love, respect, and humility that bind us all together. At this time, in Atlantis, reigned King Atlas, known as the First. He grew troubled with an unusual unease, fearing that the people might rise against him and deprive him of his rightful rule over the city. No longer did he trust anyone, and whether out of fear, jealousy, or some other dark impulse, he resolved to strike first and conquer the remaining Atlantean tribes. Thus, for the first time in Atlantis, farming tools were forged into weapons. Many swords, spearheads, and arrows were crafted, along with the heads of warhammers and mallets. Shields were covered in the hides of beasts. They donned armor made of metal fish scales and crowned themselves with round helmets in the shape of crustaceans. Their symbol became the octopus, as though they sought to show that with their many tentacles they would wrap around and strangle the world. Then they saddled horses and rode off to war. At first, they fell upon the villages surrounding the city. The people here, whether out of fear or surprise, knelt and surrendered without a fight. As Atlas's army advanced further inland, there were those who rose to resist. And so, for the first time, Atlantean blood was spilled by the swords of their own kin. After a series of clashes, raids, and ambushes, only the last northern stronghold of the free people remained. Here, all who had fled or refused to accept Atlas's cruel rule had gathered. The local leader, known as Toltec, was a brave and wise man who sought to avoid bloodshed at all costs. Knowing that he could not match the Atlantean force in numbers or weapons, and feeling that he could not come to terms with King Atlas, he led his people stealthily toward the western mountains, intending to cross them. Toltec knew these western mountains well, and thus guided his people along safe paths. However, because the departure had been sudden, with many frightened people and entire families fleeing together, the march was slow, and in the confusion, soon turning to panic, the Atlanteans, ever relentless on their swift horses, soon tracked and overtook them at a mountain pass. Toltec, with his bravest men and his sons, took up position at the rear of the column to slow the advancing army. As the Atlanteans drew near, they hurled stones down from the mountain slopes. This halted their forward cavalry and shattered many men and horses. Unable to advance further, the Atlanteans began shooting with bows. Toltec sent everyone else to safety, but with his sons, who refused to leave him, he stood his ground. Toltec cursed the Atlanteans and condemned them for their impious deeds. In response, one of the ill-fated arrows struck him in the neck, and Toltec fell into a ravine. With his sacrifice, he bought precious time for the rest to escape to safety. From that day forth, these mountains were known as Toltec's Mountains. As the Atlanteans cleared the stones blocking their path, they were horrified to find the lifeless, horribly broken bodies of their comrades and horses. This sight struck fear into them, and they instantly refused to continue. Atlas, enraged, could not compel anyone to proceed under threat of punishment. Yet he had accomplished his aim, to rid himself of all imagined opponents. He commanded the execution of the dissenters, and Toltec's head was severed, placed on a spear as a grim warning. Like a man who had lost his sanity, satisfied with his deeds, he returned to the city with his army, where he was hailed as a hero. But because of the curse placed upon the land, none dared to return, and thus no one ever explored the far side of the mountains. For a long time, it was believed that no one from Toltec's people had survived. It was thought that they had perished from hunger on the desolate, rocky peaks, or that they had been devoured by wild beasts. Yet, as it would later be revealed, this was not true. When Atlas returned to the capital, now the United Island, he ordered the slaughter of 100 white bulls in celebration of his unjust victory. The once peaceful people had become a militaristic state, with ambitions to conquer the entire known world. Their island, which had once seemed vast, now appeared too small, and no amount of wealth or riches could satisfy them. Driven by the desire for more wealth, or perhaps out of pure curiosity, they embarked with their armies aboard mighty warships and sailed eastward to the shores of Ída, where they continued their tyranny. Thus began the arrogant reign of terror by the superior Atlanteans, which foreshadowed their downfall.